The ballroom smelled like old money and fresh lies. I noticed it the second I stepped through the double doors. That particular mix of expensive floral arrangements and something cheaper underneath. My mother-in-law had rented out the entire top floor of the Meridian for her retirement party, which she'd been planning for 8 months. 8 months. I know because I'd been C8 no. Every catering revision, every seating chart update, not because she wanted my input, because she wanted me to see exactly how much thought she put into every single detail. I straightened my dress, midnight blue, silk, the one my husband once said made me look like I owned the room, and walked in. I was 31 years old. I'd made partner at my firm 6 months earlier. I had worked 80-hour weeks for 9 years to build something real, something mine. I was not the kind of woman who got rattled easily. But something felt off the moment I crossed that threshold. The room was full. Colleagues of my mother-in-law, her church friends, her book club women, my husband's relatives I'd only met at holidays. My husband was already there. I come straight from a client call, and I spotted him near the bar, laughing at something, that easy laugh I used to love. He hadn't texted me all day. I told myself it was just a busy day. I told myself a lot of things that year. I started making my way toward him when I saw her. She was sitting at the head table. Not just at the head table, she was in the seat directly to the right of my mother-in-law, the seat of honor. The seat I had been told via a seating chart email 3 weeks ago was reserved for me. I knew who she was. I had known for approximately 47 days, though I hadn't said a word to anyone. I'd found a receipt, a hotel receipt, his name, 2 guests, tucked inside the pocket of his blazer when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. I'd taken a photo, put the blazer in the bag, picked it up 3 days later like nothing happened. I'd spent those 47 days watching, waiting, deciding. She was younger than me, not by much, maybe 3 or 4 years, but enough that I noticed. She was wearing red. My mother-in-law hates red at formal events. She said it exactly 4 times in my presence. She was wearing red, and my mother-in-law was smiling at her like she'd personally hung the moon. I stood there for maybe 6 seconds. Not long, long enough. My husband finally saw me from across the room. Something flickered across his face, not guilt, not quite. More like calculation. He raised his glass slightly, a little half-wave, and turned back to the conversation he was having. That was the moment. Not the seating chart. Not the red dress. That half-wave. 9 years. I had put 9 years into that man. I'd worked double shifts in my 20s so we could afford the down payment on the house that was in both our names. I'd moved cities when he got his promotion. I'd skipped my own sister's bachelorette weekend because he had a work dinner he wanted me to attend. And he raised his glass at me from across the room like I was a neighbor he vaguely recognized. I turned around and walked back out through the double doors. Not fast. I want to be clear about that. I did not run. I walked at my normal pace, the same pace I use when I leave a courtroom after a verdict. My heels made the same sound on the marble they always do. I did not look back. The elevator took 40 seconds to arrive. I counted. In those 40 seconds, I made 4 decisions. The first was that I was done. Not angry done, not crying in the car and coming back done. Actually done, in the way that feels less like falling and more like finally letting go of something very heavy you've been carrying for a long time without fully realizing how much it was costing you. The second was that I needed to call my college friend, the one who'd become a divorce attorney, before the night was over. The third was that I was going to be okay. I didn't know how I knew that. I just did. The fourth was that I was keeping the dog. I should tell you about the 9 years because otherwise none of what came after makes sense. I met my husband at 22. He was funny in that specific way that felt charming, before I understood what it was covering. He had big plans and the kind of confidence that, when you're young, you mistake for capability. I don't say that meanly. I think he genuinely believed in himself. He just believed in himself more than the evidence warranted. We got married when I was 26. My mother-in-law cried at the wedding. Not happy cries. She told my aunt later, and my aunt, bless her, told me that she thought her son could have done better. That I was too ambitious. That a woman who put her career first would never put her family first. I spent the next 5 years trying to prove her wrong, which is its own kind of trap. I cooked dinners. I was too tired to eat. I organized holidays, sent birthday cards to people I'd met twice, Showed up to his work events and smiled and made conversation and never once mentioned that I billed 60 hours that week. I was trying to be both things at once, the ambitious career woman and the perfectly soft wife, and the effort of it was something I carried so quietly that I didn't even notice how loud the silence was becoming. My husband, meanwhile, had floated through 4 jobs in 9 years. Not fired from most of them, just moved on. Each time with a reason that made sense individually and a pattern that made sense collectively. If you were paying attention. I was paying attention, but I'd also bought into the idea that supporting your partner meant not naming the thing you were seeing. His mother had always liked things a certain way. Sunday dinners at her house. Christmas at her house. Every major holiday, every milestone, her house, her rules, her timeline. I showed up, I brought food, I helped clean. I never complained about any of it. Not to her, not to him, not really even to myself. What I got in return was a kind of tolerated presence, never fully welcomed, never included in the real conversations. The women in his family had their shorthand, their references, their jokes from childhoods I hadn't shared, and I was always slightly on the outside of the circle looking in. I thought I was okay with that. I was not okay with that. The elevator doors opened on the lobby. I walked to the valet, handed over my ticket, and stood outside in the October air, which was cool and smelled like rain. My phone started buzzing in my hand almost immediately. My husband. I watched his name light up the screen and I declined the call. He called again. I declined it. The valet brought my car. I tipped him, got in, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment. He called 11 more times in the next 20 minutes. I drove home, let the dog out, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen island I picked out. In the house I'd put the larger down payment on, and I called my friend. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up? I need to ask you something," I said, not as a friend, as an attorney. There was a pause. Then, "Okay, talk to me." I was as clear and organized as I would have been presenting a case. I told her about the hotel receipt. I told her about the 47 days. I told her about tonight. I told her what I needed to know about the house, about our joint accounts, about what equitable distribution actually meant in this state and not in the theoretical sense I'd always vaguely understood. She talked for 40 minutes. I took notes on the back of a grocery list I found on the counter. When we hung up, I knew exactly where I stood. The house was the first thing I looked at when I got off the phone. Really looked at it. The countertops I'd chosen, the shelving I'd spent a Saturday installing because he'd said he'd do it and hadn't, the framed photo on the wall from a trip we'd taken 3 years ago, back when things still felt like something worth saving. My husband called 6 more times. I didn't answer. Eventually, around 11, a text, "Where are you? We need to talk." I put my phone face down and went to sleep. I'm going to be honest about the next few weeks because I think people tell the story wrong after the fact. They make it clean. They say, "I decided to leave and I left," like it's a sentence with nothing in between. It's not like that. The in-between is where all the actual work happens. I still went to work every day. I still filed briefs and took calls and sat in depositions. Nobody at work knew anything, which was a specific kind of loneliness I hadn't expected. Carrying something that heavy while appearing completely fine. I got good at it. I'd been practicing, it turned out, for years. My husband wanted to talk. We talked. He said she was no one, which was the most insulting possible thing he could have said. He said it just happened. He said my mother-in-law didn't know, which I did not believe for 1 second, and that the seating was a coincidence, a misunderstanding, a clerical error by the event planner. He had an answer for everything that wasn't quite an answer for anything. I listened to all of it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of him. I asked 2 or 3 questions, the kind you ask when you already know the answer and you just want to see how someone performs the lie. He performed it pretty well, actually. If I hadn't been watching for it, maybe I would have bought it. But I'd had 47 days of watching. I was done buying it. My mother-in-law called me twice. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 43 seconds of explaining that I had embarrassed the whole family by leaving, that it was a scene, that I needed to apologize, that I needed to think about my husband's feelings, not his behavior, his feelings. I called her back. I want to be clear, I was calm. I was completely, entirely calm in the way that happens after a certain kind of threshold and not before it. "I heard your message," I said. "I understand you're upset. I have a few things I'd like to say, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish." She agreed, probably because she expected what I was going to say to be some form of apology or explanation. It was not. I told her I was aware of the situation. I did not specify what I meant by the situation, but I said it in a way that made it clear I was not guessing. I told her that what happened at her retirement party was something I would not be discussing with her, because it wasn't her business, and because I had made my own assessment of it, and the assessment was final. I told her that whatever happened next between her son and me was between her son and me, and that her involvement in it going forward would make things more complicated for him, not less, and that I was telling her this as a courtesy. Then I said goodbye and I hung up. She did not call again. The second call from his family that I wasn't expecting came from his younger sister, the one I'd always quietly liked more than the others. She called on a Wednesday morning, and when I picked up, she said, "I just want you to know that I'm sorry, and that I knew and I should have told you, and I'm sorry for that too." I sat with that for a moment. "How long?" I asked. "About 6 months. 6 months. I'd known for 47 days, and I'd thought that was a long time to carry it." "Thank you for telling me," I said, and I meant it. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't need them. But something about that call, the fact that someone in his family had looked at the situation and chosen honesty over loyalty by proximity, made me feel less like I'd been imagining things and more like I'd simply finally seen them. I filed for divorce 11 weeks after the retirement party. My husband did not take it well. Not violently, I want to be precise about this, but not gracefully either. There were texts I stopped reading after the first paragraph. There were 2 appearances at my office building that I reported to building security. Not loudly, just matter-of-factly, the way you handle a procedural problem. There was a period of mutual attorneys and cold emails in the particular bureaucratic misery of dividing a shared life into itemized lists. The house was the hardest part. Not emotionally. I'd already stopped thinking of it as home, which is its own quiet grief, but logistically. We'd bought it together, but I contributed 60% of the down payment, and I had the financial records to prove it. My attorney, not my friend, who'd handed the case to a colleague to avoid any conflict, but a colleague she vouched for completely, was meticulous and thorough. He got a settlement that was fair by the numbers. I kept the house, I kept the dog, I kept the kitchen island I had picked out and the shelves I had installed and the framed photo which I eventually took down and replaced with something else. His mother never reached out again. Not when the divorce was finalized. Not at the holidays. His sister texted me once, just, "Hope you're doing okay." I told her I was. That was the end of that chapter. Here's what nobody tells you about starting over at 31, which is that it is terrifying and also, underneath the terror, surprisingly spacious. I had structured so much of my life around a shared architecture, what we were doing, where we were going, whose timeline I was adjusting mine to fit. Without it, the days had a different texture. Longer in some places, quieter in ways that took some getting used to. But I also started noticing things I'd stopped noticing. The way I actually liked Sunday mornings. Coffee, no particular schedule, the dog on the couch beside me. The fact that I had opinions about things I'd been deferring to him about for years. Little things, what to watch and where to order from and how to spend a Saturday, and that my own opinions were perfectly fine. That I had good instincts and they worked when I listened to them. I started having my sister over for dinner on the weekends. I took on a case I'd been hesitant about because of the hours it would require. I redecorated the guest room, which I'd kept neutral for years in case his family needed to stay over. I painted it yellow, a very specific, stubborn, unapologetic yellow. About a year later, I was having lunch with a colleague when she said something I've thought about a lot since. She said, "You seem different than you did 2 years ago." I asked what she meant. "You seem like you're taking up the right amount of space," she said. "Before you always seemed like you were?" She paused, looking for the word. "Apologizing for yourself." "Just slightly, all the time." I thought about my mother-in-law's dinner table, about adjusting the way I spoke about work because he'd gone quiet when I talked about a win. About the 8 months of retirement party planning emails I'd been CC'd on as a form of performance. About 11 years of slight, constant, barely visible diminishment and the way you can absorb so much of it that you don't even taste it anymore. "Yeah," I said, "I think I was." I am not going to tell you that everything was easy after that because it wasn't. Divorce is hard. Starting over is hard. There are days that are harder than others, and the holidays were rough that first year, in a way I hadn't quite anticipated. Not because I missed my husband, but because I missed the version of the future I thought I was building. But I had made it to the other side of the hardest thing I'd ever navigated, mostly intact, clearer than I'd been in years. I knew what I would and would not accept. I knew how to leave a room when a room needed leaving. I knew that silence, sometimes, is the loudest possible answer. My mother-in-law had spent 8 months planning a party designed, at least in part, to put me in my place. She'd arranged it, the seating, the guest, all of it, to make a point in front of every person who mattered to her. The point I made was smaller. Just a pair of heels on marble, a 40-second elevator ride, a door closing behind me without a scene, without a speech, without giving her the satisfaction of a reaction she could retell and reframe and use. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people waiting for you to fall apart is simply leave. I walked out of that ballroom and I kept walking. And I didn't stop until I'd built something that actually fit me. Not the woman I'd been performing. Not the version that apologized for taking up space, but the actual me, in the yellow guest room, with the dog on the couch and the Sunday mornings and the work I was proud of and the life I had, finally, stopped shrinking to fit someone else's shape. That was worth more than any seat at any table. There's something nobody warns you about when you finally do the right thing. It doesn't always feel triumphant at first. It feels quiet, almost anticlimactic. I walked out of that ballroom and the world didn't stop. The music kept playing. The drinks kept flowing. My mother-in-law probably kept smiling at the woman in the red dress. And I stood outside in the October air, waiting for my car, feeling less like a woman who had just made a power move and more like someone who had finally, quietly, told the truth. I think about cause and effect a lot when I look back at those years. Not in a dramatic way. Not fate or karma in any mystical sense. Just the plain, ordinary logic of it. Every choice compounds. My mother-in-law made a choice, over and over, to treat me as something temporary, something tolerated. My husband made a choice to let her, to let a lot of things. And I made choices too. To stay quiet, to adjust, to perform contentment I didn't fully feel. And those choices had their own consequences, the slow kind that creep up on you until one day you're standing in an elevator counting the seconds and realizing you've been carrying something for years that was never yours to carry. What I had to reckon with, and I mean really sit with, was that intelligence without honesty is just clever self-deception. I knew things. I had the receipt. I had 47 days of watching. I had years of smaller evidence, and I kept filing it away instead of acting on it. I told myself I was being careful, being smart. But there's a version of being smart that's really just being afraid, and I've been living in that version for a long time. Real clarity, the kind that actually serves you, requires you to look at what you know and do something with it. Not punish yourself for what you didn't see sooner. Just see it now, clearly, and move. His sister's call stays with me. She knew for 6 months and didn't say anything. And she called to apologize for that, not because anyone made her, but because she had decided that honesty mattered more than keeping the peace. That's a harder choice than it sounds. Family loyalty is real pressure, and she chose something harder than comfort. I've tried to hold on to that as a model for how I want to move through the world, do the harder, more honest thing, even when it costs you something. The part I'm most proud of isn't the divorce, or keeping the house, or any of the outcomes. It's the 40 seconds in that elevator where I didn't fall apart, where I chose, consciously, deliberately, to handle what I was feeling without making it a scene, without handing my dignity over to people who had already shown me exactly how little they valued it. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from deciding repeatedly over time who you want to be when things get hard. I had been deciding that even when I didn't know I was. I painted the guest room yellow because I wanted to. That's all. No symbolism required. Just a woman in her own house, making a choice that was entirely uncomplicatedly hers. It turns out that's enough.